Feeling lost is universal. And being found can feel impossible. But on this podcast, we think following your passions just might be the key to finding your purpose and to finding who you are. Welcome to Lost and Found. Okie dokie. Welcome to Lost and Found, a new podcast that's, just about that, trying to find yourself when, you feel lost, whether that's, through following your passions into a career or just trying to pursue your interests in some way. So today I'm here with Mark, and so thank you so much. You were my third guest. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
So I thought that we'd first start out with just a little introduction of how I know you. So I was in one of your classes on, I believe it was disease identification and management with New York Botanical Garden. And I always, think back to all the stories that you told us, about your work in this field. Just really stuck with me. And I could tell how passionate you were about, what you do. So with that, I wanted to, pass it on to you and ask if you could kind of just describe, I suppose, what it is that you do. How would you describe yourself?
Sure. So, first, as you were introducing me, kind of, one of the things that I invariably get after teaching every class is there's always a couple of students, especially in the disease class versus the insect class. In the disease class, I always get a couple of students that say, "You've ruined my life," right? Because, but very sarcastically in a fun way, because now they understand a lot of these fungi and bacteria and phytoplasms and different diseases and insects that transmit them and all this stuff. And they'll be walking down the road and they can see this leaf spot and this canker and all this different stuff. And they have a good idea of what it all is now. And it's not like you can wave a magic wand and just make it all just instantly go away. You have to, a lot of trees and shrubs and things, they live with this stuff. And it deforms them and everything. And with the potential of eventually getting them to the point where we humans decide that they are no longer aesthetic, right? And so it impacts people quite a bit in a good way, right? Because we have to live with a lot of stuff that's in our environment and just accept it, kind of. But one of the things that I thought I would talk about a little bit, if you will, was how I got involved in this, right? In horticulture and that. And, people talk about, like you said, finding yourself. And I remember talking at work one time to one of the guys, and he was saying how with his kids, it's like he's got one son and he just seems to go from one thing to another. And it's all like it was all planned out, and he ends up in a good spot. And then another son, and he never seems to do the right thing, and it's hard and it's difficult and it doesn't get him to where he wants to go. And it's just all happenstance, sometimes. But what happened with me, when I was about 11 years old, I used to ride my bicycle in Redding, Connecticut, kind of not across town, but it was probably about 2 miles. I would ride my bicycle over to the lady. Her name was Mrs. Warner, and she was 88 years old at the time. And I would ride my bicycle over to her house to get the mail, because she had the post office in her house, this little softbox house. And, she was widowed,
Mhm.
And I'd pick up, I can remember going up on the little porch, and she'd come and open the little slat, and she knew who I was, and she'd hand me the mail, and I'd get on my bike and ride back home. Somehow or other, I ended up over at her house working for her. She had a flower garden out back.
Mhm.
And she must have asked my parents or my mom if they wouldn't mind letting me go over to help her weed her flower garden. And I can remember being out there. She'd be pointing at stuff with her cane, now what's this? I'm like, I don't know. Well, I think that's a weed. You better pull it out, or dig up these daylilies and cut it in half and put them back in and make them spread, all that kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
one of the things that I distinctly remember was, she had these fields just right off the edge of the lawn, just a mowed field. And out in that mowed field was this bright orange flower, right? Bright orange. And you got all this kind of tan grass and everything, bright orange flower. And I asked her, I said, what is that? And to this day, I can hear her voice in my head. And she said it just like this, with the inflection of an elderly person in her voice. She goes, why, that's butterfly weed, right? So, and to this day, like when I'm teaching at the New York Botanical Garden and I see that orange butterfly weed, it takes me right back to that very day.
Mhm.
And all those different kinds of milkweeds, but that orange one is just something to me.
Mhm.
But eventually I went on working at the nursery up the road from my house, a little family nursery, and they were great people. I think of them as the second set of parents. They helped me. I used to work for them after school, and of course, I'm learning all this plant material, working with them. Me and my brothers would go up and dig trees and shrubs for them at the end of the day after we got out of high school. And but I when I got into high school, I went to Henry Abbott Tech for plumbing, of all things. And I did work in the trade for like 3 years or so. But you wouldn't think there would be a big connection between plumbing and horticulture, right? But as years went on, and I matured, and the nursery, and we did a lot of spraying for gypsy moths and that sort of thing. And because I knew so much about how to specify plumbing fittings, the sizes, and the different things, and so on, and understood about water and volume and pressure and all this stuff, I rebuilt these ancient pumps that he had and kept them running and all that sort of thing. And it has always served me very well to know that, have that plumbing background
Hmm.
for the operation of the equipment. And but while I was working for him, I got tired of the building trades, and I ended up working for him full time. And was probably with him about full time about 6 months. And he was the one on a rainy day. I went into work, and he said, "Come on, get in the car. We're going to go take a ride." And I said, "Where are we going to go?" And he drove from Reading, Connecticut. He drove the hour and a half or whatever it is up to Storrs, Connecticut. And he says, "I'm going to take you up to Yukon. This is where you need to go to school." Okay.
Wow.
I mean, how many people do you know of, if you were working for them, that would say, "Come on, today's the day. It's a rainy day. We can't do much. Get in the car. I'm going to take you up to Yukon." And he gave me a tour of the campus because that's where he had gone to school.
Mhm.
And when I got back, I contacted my high school advisor, Mr. Haddad. Now, this is 3 years out of high school, right?
Mhm.
And I had decent grades, though it was from a trade school, but it was enough. He got me into SATs. I did that. And the Torrington branch of UConn they were trying to close it. So that branch, he wanted people to fill seats,
Mm.
right? Get
Yeah.
the enrollment up so they wouldn't close it. And so I went up there and they were like, dusting off the seats and, this seat's going to be yours, and got right in. And of course, once you get in the system, now you're in, right?
Mhm.
And so I spent a couple of years at the branches, Torrington, and one in Waterbury, and then transferred up to the main campus and got my full degree that way. So, kind of a long story. But again, I was ahead of the game even when I got up to the main campus. I knew all this plant material for having worked with it for
Yeah.
a good number of years,
Mhm.
And so, not a path that I planned on or intended. And it was some years later when I worked for a large tree company in Danbury, Connecticut, and they sent me to their arboretum down in the Carolinas, where they had the PhD and people, and they taught us how to do a lot of insect and disease control, what to look for, and that was really the start of it. And the thing is once you start that, people just, you think you don't know anything, but just a little bit more than everybody else, and people ask you, and then when you don't quite know, then you look it up and you figure it out, and you're out and about and you see a good book, and back then you'd buy it, because there
Yeah.
was no internet, right?
Mhm.
Kind of dating myself, I guess, but it just happened,
Yeah.
and I like to say it found me.
Mhm.
I didn't go looking for it. So
Mhm.
in a nutshell, that's kind of where I've been.
That's very interesting because now this is, you're like I said, you're my third guest. So that's 3 out of 3 people who have said that, this path kind of found them. Go
My,
ahead.
my wife um, had a good friend, still has a good friend. She's down in DC.
Mhm.
And I've also listened to like public radio and kind of sane discussion about some of this stuff from CEOs and owners of companies and that. And what this gal did was she did a lot of uh, volunteer work for like political campaigns here back in the day. Here in Connecticut was Ratchford, right?
Mhm.
And of course, she did all this volunteering, and she always wanted to help people. What could she do to help people? And of course, when he won the election, well, what do? They give jobs to the people that were most dedicated to them. But
Mhm.
she eventually worked her way up, and she was working for the office of the president under Obama. And so the point I'm trying to make is when you do this volunteer work,
Mhm.
you know, um, it exposes you to people that have connections, and it elevates you, and you get these opportunities that come along. And I think that's something that's missing today with some young people with their phones and everything. And I was back in substitute teaching today, and so many of the kids just seem to be like they feel like they're entitled, like
Mhm.
society owes them something just because they exist. And you do have to put your best foot forward
Mhm.
sometimes, and it gets you positive exposure. And
Mhm.
I think that's something that is kind of forgotten. And it's hard, you're working for free, but you're really not working for free. You're gaining experience. But um, just really a lot of cool things that, as I'm sitting here talking about a lot of cool things, um, if I could tell this one story that years ago uh, found extremely interesting. So I'm listening to, and this is just out of nowhere, I know, but I want to tell it. So I'm driving down the road and I'm listening to public radio station, and they started talking about this paleo archaeologist, I guess, and paleobotanist, and he spent like 10 years going around the world documenting leaf sizes and shapes for native plant material for that area.
Wow.
Okay. Maybe I talked about this when you were in my class. I don't know. But he had a theory that there had to be a reason for the serrations, the jagged leaf margins, and water evapotranspiration from the leaf. And the theory was is that if you go down to the tropics, think of a rubber plant, right? You just got this leaf that's kind of smooth margin, right? No serrations, just kind of this oval elliptical thing, right? Because down there where it's warm, moisture evaporates readily. The plant can get rid of that excess moisture. But up here in the temperate climates, where it's cooler, the moisture doesn't evaporate as fast from the leaf. So you need a larger area, and that larger area comes in with the serrations, right? There's more distance. And so he logged all these different leaf shapes for native plant material in all around the world, documented it. He had all the data from weather stations for the temperature for all these areas, right? And when he got all done putting all this in, he could go anywhere in the world and predict the average annual temperature for an area from leaf shape to within 1 degree.
Wow.
Think about it. Think about it. To be able to predict the average annual temperature to within 1 degree from leaf shape. Well, you think, oh, what does that do for us now? Well, think of somebody who studies dinosaurs and the fossil record. And well, what was the temperature back then? Well, if they get enough leaf fossils, they know what the temperature was within 1 degree. I mean, to me, that's just stunning.
Yeah.
Stunning that somebody could. And the gentleman's name was Peter Wolf, I think it was. Just an absolutely fantastic thing to hear. And in fact, when I started listening to, I ended up pulling off the side of the road to finish listening to it because I was just so fascinated by it. But it's those kinds of things that kind of stop you in your tracks sometimes. And I do a lot of walks on the rail trail here, and you're always seeing something that just strikes you. So.
I mean, that's definitely a very interesting story, especially because you have to imagine that he really, really loved what he was doing, and to go through all of that effort and stuff.
Well, I mean, one of the things to me was like, how did he get to where he came up with this idea, hypothesis that this had to be something? So you're getting all this input, your work, and all these different things. But I guess I'm just trying to say is he made such a difference in his profession in the world with archaeologists and just fascinating to me that somebody could come up with something like that and then essentially have it pan out to be absolutely true, and so I hope people out there that are listening, you have an idea, run with it. You just get these things that interest you, and how much further can you take it, I guess. And it's very true about how you ask a question and you get an answer that leads to another question. Right. And you just kind of keep going and going. I can't tell you, this day and age, how many times I've gone down rabbit holes on the computer looking stuff up and, and all of a sudden after a half hour is like, what was I looking for in the first place? You got to sort through everything. So you just kind of keep going. And you know, if you have that kind of cat curiosity, you know,
Mhm.
like if anybody owns a cat, you know, they're curious and you just keep poking and, you know, what's this? And, you know, and you just, oh my God, look at this thing. And you just keep going with it.
Mhm.
But
Um, so you mentioned before, it was your employer, right, who kind of
right.
brought you to the school, and
Yeah.
who told you, like, "You're going here." So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, if you hadn't had, somebody like that in your life, do you think that your path would have been different?
I think so. You know, because they at the time, and I've talked to them. Actually, they talked to my wife, and they told my wife that they can remember having discussions. You know, kind of like almost worried about me. You know, was I? You know, it was kind of like I was just like floundering. You know, going along, didn't know what I wanted to do, and
Mhm.
this and that, and that's how they kind of made the decision to try to give me some uh, direction with higher education and something that I had, you know, because nobody in my family had ever gone to college. I was the first one to go to college, so that
Mhm.
was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe it sounds cliche or whatever you want to say it, but it was kind of a big deal because
Mhm.
I can remember uh, at some point, uh, you know, like when I was in high school or whatever, you'd hear kids and different people talking about college, and that was for smart people. You know, it was like I didn't consider myself smart enough to go to
Huh.
college. Now, I'm certainly not the smartest tool in the shed. I mean, I have a sister that can put me to shame, you know, just really sharp. Um, but, you know, I struggled a little bit, but,
Mhm.
you know, I persevered. I got through it. And in fact, okay, one story that comes to mind, you know, here's this tenacity, you know, this drive to keep going. And this
Mhm.
is how I am. So you get a load of this. So, so I went to trade school, which is essentially like a 2-year high school education,
Mhm.
right? Because you spend half the time in your trade, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the math and everything wasn't real advanced.
Yeah.
So I get into college, and everybody was, you know, all these smart people were saying how hard organic chemistry was. You know, chemistry was bad enough, but then there's organic chemistry. And the thing that I didn't realize, you know, I'm doing the homework. I could get it done. I can remember having the whole living room table covered with books and papers, and I'm looking stuff up, and you're putting these chains of molecules together and prefixes and getting the homework done, grinding through it.
Mhm.
And I didn't know it at the time, but what you needed to do is like learning a language. You needed
Mhm.
to just memorize things, you
Mhm.
know, and got to the first midterm exam, and I couldn't do it. I recognized the stuff, but I didn't have books, I didn't have papers, I didn't have everything out. But you know, I realized right then and there I needed to memorize this stuff. You know, um, and so you know, I half-heartedly tried to do some of the problems. I think I got one question right on the exam, right? So uh, the she hands all the exams back, and she goes, I don't know what I'm going to do with any of you people. None of you passed this test. She said, the highest grade was a 45 and the lowest grade was a 5. Well, guess who got the 5, right? So I'm just like, you know, and I'm kind of burning up inside because I'm saying, you know, you're a crappy teacher because you could have said you all need to memorize this stuff,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So that you know, you're not, it's not going to be an open book test, right?
Mhm.
So she goes, I don't know what I'm going to do with you people. I wouldn't want to go to any hospital that any one of you people ever work at, right? And I'm just like sitting there fuming, right? And I think I'm like one or two guys in the class. The rest of it was all these girls, right? And not that there's anything wrong with that. But one of them finally piped up and said, well, why don't you give us a take-home exam, right? And she goes, all right, tell you what I'll do. Come back in an hour after class. She said, I'll go down and make new copies of this exam and
Mhm.
give it to you, and you'll have a week to do it at home. And I'm like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. I'm like, thank you very much. I just got an A,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I marched out of that classroom right over to the library, took out every organic chemistry book I could find on the shelf. I'm walking out with a stack 2 feet high of all these books, right? I go home, I spread them all out on the table, and I think that afternoon I had every problem done on the exam plus the extra credit, right?
Nice.
Handed in. And the day came when we had to hand it in. There were still people trying to do it. They were
Wow.
still trying to do it. They didn't have all the
Oh.
answers, right? So
Oh.
she goes and she corrects it. And the next day she hands them back or whatever. And she goes to me, she
Mhm.
goes, and you, I want to see you in my office after class. Okay, right? So I walk into her office and she goes, now, who do you know?
Yeah.
I said, what? She's like, who do you know? You got
Yeah, yeah.
everything right. I know you didn't copy because nobody else has all the answers, right? And I said, I don't know anybody. I said, you gave us an exam that you expected us to do in class in an hour as a take-home exam for 1 week. And I said, I walked over to the library, took out all the books, and I can tell you, I'm in her office and I recognized one of the books. And I
Yeah.
said, in that book that I took out of the library, in that book, on or about, and I can remember to this day, page 174 is an example of this number problem 12 on the exam. And I said, I did the whole thing in about an hour because I had all the books. She was like, all right, get out of here. But then after that, I knew I had to memorize stuff. So when I did
Yeah.
homework, okay, memorize all these briefs, and I was fine.
Mhm.
And to this day, I contend that she was a crappy teacher because she didn't explain how. But that's how. This was in one of the small branches, right? In
Mhm.
Waterbury, you had 24 people in class. Whatever. If that was up at UConn, they had 300 in a class. They could have cared less. They just flunk in, you're out.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out how to survive. So I had a
Mhm.
little bit more of a chance to survive. But that's my wife says that's why she married me, because I may stumble, I may fall down, but I'm getting back up. I am getting
Mhm.
back up.
Yeah.
And that's what I did with that.
Mhm.
And so it's just that drive that you ain't gonna beat me down, lady, you
Mhm.
know. And
I'm wondering then, do you think that you almost can't succeed in following, things that you're interested in without that sort of drive and tenacity that you were talking about?
well, I think it's a large part of it.
Mhm.
You know, um, I've listened to a lot of uh, radio commentaries even years ago, and they were talking to like these people that were responsible for hiring, and a lot of them were saying they didn't want to hire anybody that got all straight A's,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Because they didn't know what it was like to fail, pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and figure out a way to get it done. They
Mm.
would much rather hire somebody that had, okay, maybe a B plus average with a couple of A's along the way, because they had to work at it. But
Mhm.
and I suppose that probably to some degree it depends on the line of work that you're into.
Mhm.
You know, if you're in engineering, you can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
You're building a bridge, and like one engineer said, one teacher said, you have to get everything right.
Mhm.
He wouldn't give partial credit
Mhm.
because you can't build a bridge and do it partially right, So, but even with horticulture, planting plants, you can't plant the stuff partially right, because what happens, they get stressed, and then they get borers, and they get fungus, and they get this, that, and the other, and they don't
Mhm.
look good, and leaves turn yellow, and they start dropping,
Yeah.
and so you have to get it 100%. It's just like this flower box behind me. I mean, if
Mhm.
you look at it, it looks spectacular. That's because I went all out and did everything right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Got everything right,
Yeah.
and it makes a difference. So I understand, there's probably a fine line somewhere. How do you do it? But you just have to. I oftentimes tell people in class, you got to be honest with yourself.
Mhm.
You know, am
Yeah.
I really doing this? So many times I get people, well, I planted it there, and it's kind of like the insinuation that, well, if I put it there, it has to be right.
Mm.
Oh, I just hit something on my keyboard. Uh, oh, you know what? I got to plug in. Hang on
Oh,
one
sure,
second.
sure.
So
Okay.
yeah, the analogy that they used was like they didn't want uh, employees that were straight A's, jumped through all the hoops, totally successful. They wanted somebody that had a little more drive to it.
Mhm.
Now, whether that holds true for everybody, that I guess is to be seen, but
Mhm.
there's probably a little something to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it does kind of bring to mind, thoughts about failure and how I think I mean, I don't wanna generalize, but I would say that pretty much everybody is probably at one point in their life kind of afraid to fail. And, maybe that comes from being raised to, be afraid of doing things, incorrectly.
yeah,
But I'm wondering, so you mentioned the flower box behind you. Um, was that like a one-time effort, or would you say, I would imagine it's from all of your experiences.
yeah.
Um,
Well, so I built this deck, and I might have
mhm.
talked about this in the disease class you took.
I think you
So
did tell the story, yeah, but go ahead.
yeah, so uh, oh God, it must be at least 15 years ago now, maybe almost 20. Um, with the impatiens, right? Impatiens, that's the king of annual flowers for the shade, right? There is
Mhm,
nothing that's as spectacular as impatiens in the shade when it comes to flowering, and so we plant them for years and years and years. They're all over the place. And of course, you get people that don't plant them in the right conditions, so they become stressed. And all of a sudden, this fungus like organism emerges, one of the oomycetes, right? The downy mildews, not
mhm,
powdery mildew,
yeah,
downy mildew, no longer considered to be a true fungus. And two of the main reasons is because the sporangium, which is this sac which can be wind blown like dust in the air, has like 10 or 12 spores in it. And then when that sac, the sporangiophore, lands on a wet leaf, okay, it imbibes water, and then 10 spores erupt from that. And those spores are flagellated, they can swim.
mhm,
A true fungus, the spore lands where it lands, and either water or an external force, wind, has to move it. These things can swim. They can seek out a stomata in the leaf and enter the leaf, right?
mhm,
And they think the oomycetes are related to the brown algae in the ocean, right? So they have a high affinity for water. They
mhm,
made the leap from like the oceans millions of years ago. The brown algae, they're uh, things are flagellated so they can swim. So are these. And the other difference is the cell walls. I guess the cell walls of the oomycetes have a lot more cellulose in them,
mhm,
which is from what? Plants, right?
yeah,
Cellulose is wood, essentially. And so that's really what sets them apart. So they're a very difficult disease organism to control,
mhm,
and they like a lot of water. Well, That's because this organism, they can deal with the very minimal amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. But if you have excessive water,
Mhm.
the plant cannot do well because there's not enough oxygen there for the roots in the soil. So these things just, you got poor conditions for the plant, good conditions for the disease, and it takes off and it goes crazy because people aren't being honest with themselves about or understanding how
Mhm.
to properly water something. If you can feel moisture there, there's enough. You don't
Yeah.
need to drown it and eliminate the oxygen. So I planted impatiens on my deck, and these oomycetes had run wild, just destroyed the industry as far as impatiens went, right? But I was like, well, I've never had impatiens here. I'll be careful, this, that, and the other, right? So I planted them. In fact, it may have been this very window box. I had 4 or 5 and planted these impatiens in there and put them on the railing.
Mhm.
And they seemed to be doing okay. And they were getting just about 8 inches high, and they were looking pretty good. And then we were getting ready to go on vacation, and they were starting to look a little bit chlorotic, a little
Mhm.
bit yellow. And I glanced at it and said, oh, they just need fertilizer, right? Nitrogen, right? But, here it is. We're getting ready to go away on vacation. I want to get out of here. I need to look at it close, watered them really good, right? Because we were going away. So I'm
Yeah.
saturating them with water, which is right
Yeah.
the incorrect thing to do.
Yeah.
And I came back to stalks, no leaves on them, which then I realized it was the downy mildew. So I knew then that, okay, yeah, the watering is really critical. I have since grown impatiens. Since then, they've come out with some resistant varieties, but
Mhm.
very careful about how I water. I got a little tiny 3/8 hose. I just go over the lip of the pot, the edge of the pot, get the potting mix wet. Don't water the flowers. You see this geranium here, right? You don't see any mildew on it or gray mold, botrytis. The white ones look good. That's because I do not spray them,
Mhm.
right? Don't, everybody else would just, spray them down, get them all wet. You lose the flowers. Just, they have roots, right? I can't tell you
Yeah.
how many times I've said, do people forget that plants have roots, right? Just water the soil,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then if you want, you saturate it, but then pour the excess out, right? That
Mhm.
little tray that's down here, right? But
Yeah.
most of the time, people will leave that full and it stays wet, and that, Pythium and Phytophthora, root rots, and Phalaenopsis will get going. I waited, half hour and then tip them all up and drain out the excess.
Mhm.
And I've since grown the impatiens. I'll even pick this up if they were forecasting rain. You can't see it, but over to this side over here, I built a metal roof pavilion. So if they're forecasting rain, I pick all the pots up when I can
Mm.
and put them underneath there, just so that all that foliage and the flower petals stay dry. What a difference it makes.
Mhm.
What a difference it makes. But it was really that incident with the impatiens where went away on vacation. I had saturated them before I left, and I came back to just these stalks with no leaves and flowers on them, and realized what it was.
Mhm.
And that's just kind of one of those stories that you put 2 and 2 together. And I think what it is for your people that are listening
Mhm.
is to have that critical eye
Mm.
where sometimes that can get you into trouble too, where you worry too much about the wrong things.
Mhm. Yeah.
But certainly when it comes to diseases, people don't think of watering as being a critical skill, but it is.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
is. And it's not even the watering. I tell people all the time now, I've done lectures for garden clubs and this and that, and I tell them, I never tell anybody that the plant is suffering from too much water, because you get all kinds of pushback. Oh, my landscaper knows what he's doing. I know how to water. My landscaper's been doing this for 30 years. I just paid $30,000 for an irrigation system, and he told me everything was going to be beautiful, not a problem, right? I never tell anybody it's got too much water. You know what I say? I look at the plant. Somebody calls me, asks me to look at it. What's wrong with it? I look at it and go, this is obviously suffering from oxygen deprivation. That's what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it is. Too much water. It eliminates the oxygen from the soil, then goes into anaerobic respiration, and plant looks like crap, and the fungus takes over and kills it. Right? I mean, it's that simple. But if you say this is suffering from oxygen deprivation, most people go, huh? What? What? You know, and they start asking you more questions. You let them ask all the questions until they come to the realization that there's too much water on it.
Yeah. But I feel like this could definitely be, I guess, a good, what would you say? Analogy, maybe. You know, you working on this, flower box behind you. And like the failures that people kind of go through and are afraid to make, people are afraid to make mistakes and stuff. So I'm wondering if on your career path to where you are now and stuff, were there any failures that were maybe a little bit more, weighty than this flower box initially, that maybe gave you pause and kind of made you question if you should just go back to plumbing or, anything like that?
Um, I think it was there were more successes because of the good people that I was exposed to.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some failures along the way. Yes. Oh, okay. One failure came to mind. Here we go. So he sent me with a Crimson King Norway maple, probably about a 2-inch caliper, and to Danbury, right off exit 8. And at the time, there's still a bunch of gas stations there. And at the time, it was Kovacs gas station. I don't know what brand gas he was selling, but they were opening it up, and it had a stone circle thing. It was probably about 4 feet in diameter, and they wanted this one tree planted in it. And I remember having a bitch of a time getting it up there and getting it in, and we didn't have enough soil in the thing, so it was down kind of low, but we didn't have a piece of equipment to lift it, right? So it was just like, oh, okay, fill it in, cover it up, and the tree promptly died.
Yeah.
Right? It promptly died.
Mm.
And they must have called and said, hey, can you replace this? It's dead. And Jim, the owner, went out there and I guess replaced it. And boy, did I hear about it at the end of the day. He says, what in the world were you thinking? This thing had to have been down, more than a foot excessively deep, and it was just like, so it kind of bit me, and but I really won't ever forget that, just too deep and not enough oxygen getting to the roots. And it takes really, in that case where it's severe, it takes about 3 weeks. About 3 weeks.
Yeah.
3 to 4 weeks, and it's done. And that's all it takes. And I still to this day see that sort of thing all the time. But in contrast, or from then on, I always would say, you're in with Jim talking, and that was to his credit how good he was, because he knew it was something that had to be learned. And we would talk, and we kind of came up with this analogy. If you have to err on planting depth, you're far better off to err on planting high than planting low. Because if you plant low, okay, maybe it's got plenty of moisture down there, but it ain't getting oxygen to the roots. But if you plant high, it's getting oxygen. It may dry out, but you can add water. Right? Yeah. And then the roots will grow out and down and find their level right on the surface, and it'll be fine. And a good example of that is I was sent out to plant 3 little dogwood trees on this estate in Katona, New York. And I'm getting ready to go. and they're only like, inch caliper, small. You could easily pick one up. It was maybe 100 pounds. And I got the trees in the truck. I'm ready to go, pickup truck. And the salesman comes out and he says, when you get there, be aware that we've planted trees there, these 3 trees there. We've replaced them 3 times because every time they've died. And I'm like, boy, this is going to be one happy customer when I pull in the driveway, right? They've died for 3 years in a row, right? Mm-hmm. And so I get there and the guy was actually pretty decent. And I asked him, I said, could you please show me where you want these planted? And he said, yeah, right over there. And he pointed. And it was a good understory, larger trees, swamp maples or red maples, and had been cleared underneath. So that was a good light setting. But as we walked out, you could hear the water squishing underneath our feet. Oh. Right? I get out there, right where he wanted them. He pointed, and I took my heavy hoe and I peeled the sod off, and there was a film of water just running right over the ground.
Yeah.
Just totally saturated. I put the sod back. I put the trees on top of the ground, right? These are balled and burlap. I just set them right on top of the grass. And the guys that were with me, I said, this is a big estate. Go find out where they've been dumping stuff for years. Start digging it up and bringing it here. And, from the top of the root ball out probably, 6-8 feet all the way around these 3 trees and in the middle, right? Raised it all up. Didn't even water them. I said, there's enough water on this ground. It's just going to wick up. They're sitting right on top, right? And later that fall, that year, he wrote a letter saying that anytime they sent a crew out, that I was to be the one running the crew because these trees look beautiful. That's all it was. So there there's that contrast from where I planted that, not really all that intentionally, that Norway maple at the gas station too deep, and it immediately crapped out, and then kind of understanding what's going on with the oxygen because the person that convinced me to go to college knew, and he kind of taught me and helped to teach me, and I understood. And when I planted those 3 little dogwoods, I knew they had to be way up high and successful.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to, having to keep at something, I think, because, I wonder if people kind of hope that they don't really have to keep trying and trying and trying and like learning maybe from their mistakes. I wonder if a lot of people.
Well, that's the thing. If you say you keep trying, but what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing again and expecting a different result. Why did that Norway maple die? Right? It died because it was just too deep. Well, when you say it was too deep, well, what was it about being too deep? It wasn't getting oxygen, right? Because even when you water it, it displaces the oxygen. And, that leads me to the whole, I got my favorite little sayings all the time, and when I try to get people to understand, I'll ask them, is water toxic? And I used to go through this with my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, right? God rest her soul. I'd ask, is water toxic? The water you give your my children, your grandchildren, that comes out of the faucet, is that water in the purest sense toxic? Well, no. Well, let me see you put your head in a bucket of water for 5 minutes. Oh, well, that's different. I said, no, it's not. The water cut off your oxygen and it killed you. That's the mode of action. How many people die in swimming pools every year? I mean, it's, how is it or what is it that makes it toxic, right? You use it under the right conditions. It's not, it's like, how many people die in automobile accidents, right? Well, generally you died in an automobile accident because you were driving too fast, you were driving drunk, you were not paying attention to the speed limit, you had bald tires on the car, you weren't wearing a seatbelt, right? You do all these other things that make it safer. Well, you have to do things to make it safer for the plants, right?
So I guess Go ahead.
Crude analogy there, I guess, but that's how my pea brain thinks,
No, but it's definitely it's an important distinction, I think, between, trying to, follow a path that you might be trying to go down. And if you hit a roadblock or you hit like obstacles, I think it's definitely important to, an important distinction to say, that you shouldn't just keep trying the same thing over and over
Yeah.
again
And I
for
think that's one of the things that, and now that I'm talking with you, that makes me think about it is when you realize you did something wrong or something didn't go right or
Mhm.
something just isn't jiving, it takes that person to ask yourself, well, what is it that I did wrong?
Yeah.
What is it that I didn't get? And what is it that's going to make it right the next time?
Mhm.
Would seem to me.
Yeah.
And I can remember Jim's wife, Sheila, um, saying to me one time, uh, and this kind of goes to what you were saying. She said to me, one day she says to me, and I forget what the situation was and whatever, something broke and I fixed it, or and got up and running again. I think it was with one of the big tree sprayers, And
Mhm.
she said, Mark, she says, I got to hand it to you. She says, you always seem to be involved in something that breaks or something that goes wrong or this and that, but
Mhm.
you always fix it.
Yeah.
You always fix it. You get it running.
You mentioned that, you kind of feel like maybe it's just part of your personality to be this tenacious. Uh, I'm wondering, people who might not have that personality trait, do you think they're at a huge disadvantage when following their passions, or do you
Well,
think you could foster that?
I think, all the stuff that I've done,
Mhm.
very physical work, hands on, all that sort of thing. But some of the things that I think about today that I wish I had a little bit of talent for, almost you feel like it's just too late to learn.
Mm.
Um, and at 64, sometimes I think it would be nice to be able to play a musical instrument.
Mhm.
Well, that's a totally different mindset.
Yeah.
And I really couldn't speak to that, what it takes to be good at that. And because it just never done it. Or
Mhm.
to be an artist, to paint something. I mean, I can draw mechanical stuff, protractor, square, T square,
Mhm.
all that. My dad was a tool maker. I'm very good at reading mechanical drawings. I find mistakes in, parts diagrams for, washer and dryer and all that, because, it's kind of becoming a lost art.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember taking art appreciation, I think my very first semester. And two things to this. Um, he wanted us to have an appreciation for spatial uh, acknowledgement, I guess.
Mhm.
And so the assignment he gave, and understand that the Torrington branch of UConn was one building.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a square, like the Pentagon. It was open in the center, courtyard, but square. And he
Mhm.
says, I just want you to do a sketch of this whole building with the rooms to give you an idea of how different rooms, space, and everything are laid out, because that's part of art, was, having spatial context there. And I remember this one kid. I mean, I thought he was going to have a heart attack, just turned red. Oh my God. This was just, and I'm like, I came from trade school, Henry Abbott Tech. We had to do blueprint reading.
Mhm.
We drew houses, architectural drawing, draw all the siding on and all that sort of thing. And I was like, this is a piece of cake. And um, so how I did that was I just got 1/4 inch graph paper and I started at the front doors, one step was one square on the graph paper and the width of the door,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I just started pacing everything out like that same size step. And I got all the way around the building. I did all the rooms, approximately how wide they were and all that, step, 5 steps and a half, or, 8.5 steps or 9 steps or whatever, but 20 steps long, all the way around. And I got back around to the front door and I was off by 1 square. That was it. That's how accurate it was, just from pacing it off.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when he handed them back, he made a comment that he was shocked, genuinely shocked at the quality of some of these drawings. He just couldn't believe it, the teacher. And he was looking right at me, It was just like, but that's because of the, the training I had at a trade school, being able to do that. Now, in contrast to that, because that was essentially kind of a mechanical drawing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I could do. It wasn't freehand drawn, a human or whatever. But one of the ones that stuck with me was he was talking about, he had a painting at home, and it was a street scene, looking off into a field, and there was telephone poles there, and he had it pretty much all done.
Mm-hmm.
But he was just waiting for the day when he felt like he could paint in the power lines on the
Mm-hmm.
telephone poles with that one sweep, felled sweep, starting at the wood on top of the telephone pole with that one arching sweep to get it just right and end up on the other telephone pole.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when he explained that, think of how different that is. To feel like you have to be in the right mood, frame of mind, relaxed, to just be able to walk up to that paint board with a black paint on a brush and go from one pole to the other with just the right arc, so that it looked right, and stopped right on the other pole. And, just that one felled swoop, just, what's it take to get that right?
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, it was just something I had never thought about.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is, everybody's different. Everybody has different talents.
Mm-hmm.
And, the stuff I'm talking about here worked for me, but that may not necessarily work for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to find that something else that works for you.
Yeah.
And, it's a different road, a different path, however you want to describe it. But, there are people out there that can help you, that have been there, done that.
Yeah.
And every now and then, to this day, I think about, did he ever get those wires on those telephone poles? It takes a lot of different people to make this world go round.
Yeah. Not everyone's the same. Yeah. But you mentioned too, you brought it up again, having people in your life who kind of help to teach you these things and guide you along the way. How, would you say that is crucial, or do you think that anybody could go down these interest-based paths, I guess, without that, just nobody helping them? I want to do it all myself. Do you think that's possible?
I think it is. And again, some of it's, personality that individuals are born with. And do they figure things out? Think about Einstein, look at what he figured out. He figured out an awful lot. Tesla. You ever watch? I like to watch a lot of this space kind of stuff. that astrophysicist Neil deGrasse, I think his
Mhm.
name is.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating. You know, it just something about his personality, how
Mhm.
he thinks, and we're all different. We think
Yeah.
different ways,
Yeah.
but so there I think is a little bit of that contrast, and he can grasp things that just right over my head, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But it sounds logical when he's talking about it,
Mhm.
um, and so
So
I'm talking to you, and something
yeah.
just popped into my head
Mhm.
that I'd like to mention. So this place I used to work, Lesco, we sold fertilizer, and these tractor trailer trucks would deliver the fertilizer. You got 22 pallets on a tractor trailer. Each one's got 50 bags of fertilizer on it. They weigh a ton, literally
Mhm.
each pallet.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a loading dock, so I had to, have the driver stand up in the truck, you know, hook the chain onto each pallet, and then pull it taut, and then pull it to the back, unhook the chain, grab it with the forks, unload it. And this gentleman, and I think he was from the deep south, and um, he was there, and I explained everything about how we were going to do it, how I wanted him to stand off to the side on the opposite side of the truck, so he's the furthest away from the chain in case it broke or something didn't go right, but I was going to go slow. And we had to have the truck parked just ever so on the hill so that they slid back nice and easy, and we got the whole thing unloaded. There was never an issue or an incident. And I'll never forget when we got done. I got him out of the truck and down, and we were just standing there signing the paperwork, I guess. And he reached out to shake my hand. He says, "I just wanted to let you know that I think you should be a teacher." He says, "So many places I go, people just blah 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 blah, rammy jammy, and just." He says, "You explained everything so nice,
Mhm.
and it was orderly, and he says I didn't feel unsafe. We both knew what we were doing and how we were going to do it." And I've had other people along the way tell me they always thought I should be a teacher. So, but it was nice coming from an elderly gentleman like that. I was
Mhm.
a little bit younger at the time. It was just a real compliment,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And different personalities. Everybody does their thing their way,
Mhm.
but you get other people involved. You got to think of their welfare too. They got to be safe and everything.
Yeah.
So um, I don't even know the point I was trying to make.
No, no, that's okay. That's okay. It does make me kind of think about the concept of everybody's different and everything like that. So as far as people following their interests, and everybody, of course, is different, and they'll follow them differently, and everybody has different interests and passions. But I'm wondering if you think that it is like, extremely important for people to, pursue their interests in order to kind of make the world fuller because, it is kind of we don't really want everybody to just be doing the same job, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if you think that it's a
Well, I
crucial.
think having an interest in something gives you drive,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you don't have an interest in it, it's like, oh, who cares, right? You don't feel motivated. But
Yeah.
if you have an interest in it, um, you really take it to heart. And one of and God, you're making me think about so many things. So I don't know if you remember from class me ever talking about how I used to fly hang gliders, right?
Oh, I don't
So
know if you mentioned that.
oh yeah, and I'll never forget. I think the first one I bought, I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I got a friend of mine from high school. He said, let's go out to the Bethel Sandbank or whatever. I'll show you I can, just fly down this little 50-foot hill.
Mhm.
And I was so hyped up, got there and put the glider together and carried it up the hill, and glided down. And I remember his name was Rich. And I remember he says, I can't believe you. He says, most of the time you're just walking around, not moving very fast. But he says, you got here and it was just like you were in overdrive,
Mm. Yeah.
just just so into it. And yeah, I did a lot of flying and just when I was a kid, I would make kites all the time and I'd go up to the Reading school. I'd fly kites up there. I made a dragon kite one time and this big regular kite out of newspaper and the bamboo reeds and must have been 3 times my size. It must have been, that's how you remember it. It probably wasn't, but I know it was probably a good 5 to 6 feet high.
Mhm.
And I remember one lady saying to me, she just ran into me. She says, you're always up here flying kites. I'm like, I don't know. I just like flying.
Mhm.
And but I remember being fascinated by it, interested. There's that interest.
Yeah.
It was like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
this is back in the 70s, mid to late 70s, right? Mid to late 70s. And I talked around, and this one guy said, I know somebody that's got one. They want to sell it. And I was like, okay, good. Right. Because I had been working all the time. I had the money. Where is it? Down in Bridgeport, right? I go see the guy. We go out to the field, put it together. Yeah, I'll buy it, right? $600 or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
Bought the thing, and this thing was a death trap, right? Back then, they didn't know,
Yeah.
right? But I bought it, and then I would drive up to New Hampshire. There was a farmer up there that had this nice hillside, and this glider, I was trying and they were laughing at me. I just couldn't do it. Well, this glider was just so bad. And one of the times I took off, and it was about a 250-foot hill, and I flew out and went to do this turn 180. And this glider was prone to what they called side slipping. The inside wingtip would stall, it would stop flying, lose lift, and the glider would just slide down. Slide sideways right to the ground. Right?
Oh my God.
And I can remember I had my brother's motorcycle helmet, which happened to be a full, it was a motorcycle helmet, right around your jaw and everything. And I can remember just seeing the ground come up, and I pushed out as hard as I could. And I pretty much, the glider was starting to come out of it, but I pancaked the ground hard. Just, flat, right?
Oh my gosh.
Flat. And the people that were down in the landing area said that I hit so hard and the glider was collapsed down on top of me that they didn't even run up to see how I was.
Oh my
They
God.
walked because they didn't want to see what was underneath the glider.
Oh my
Right?
gosh.
And I think it probably knocked the wind out of me because you have a small reserve chute on your chest. And I think it knocked all the air out of me.
Mhm.
And I was probably out for a minute. But then I think I came to and I said, oh, I got to unhook from the glider in case the wind blows it over, right? And I don't know how I even managed to get unhooked. And I come crawling out from underneath this glider just about the time they got up there, right? To me, they were walking up. And the looks on their faces to see me come crawling out from under this glider, they were just shocked.
Yeah.
But I'm convinced it was because I had this full face motorcycle helmet. I turned sideways at the last second. I hit flat. It wasn't like I hit with my head.
Yeah.
And, I recovered. But then it was shortly after that I met this other guy, and this other guy selling gliders. And is right at the time when they were really learning how to make these things fly nice. And I bought this other glider, and that flew really, really nice. All the flight characteristics were known. And I showed up there with that, and I started flying that thing, and I'm landing on what they call the spot landing, nailing it, and I'm turning, and they were all just so amazed. And I think that's when they realized that it wasn't me, it was the glider that I had that was so crappy.
Mm.
So the next time I went up there, he had all the same model glider that I had, because he taught up there, right?
Yeah.
And but there's once again that I wanted to do it, and I kept doing it and kept doing it, and even the face of other people practically ridiculing me.
Yeah.
I kept going and became very successful at it. I ended up around here. I used to go out to Ellenville, New York. I flew right over the Newburgh Beacon Bridge across the Hudson.
Wow.
I can remember flying from Wingdale, New York, all the way down Lake Candlewood. We were about 6,000 or 7,000 feet in elevation, more than a mile high. Flew all the way down Lake Candlewood. And then we got to Danbury, and we flew directly over Danbury Airport. And we were so proud of ourselves because we were above 5,000 feet, and we flew over a freaking airport with a control tower, which made us legal. We were legal at that altitude. But I can remember, and this is where I think gets into a little bit about how gratifying, or how you don't realize how exceptional something is that so few other people, at least at the time, were going to see or do. But I can remember it was such a beautiful day. If you can imagine being up 6,000, 7,000 feet in elevation in the air, over a mile high, and in a hang glider, right? So you're just hanging there in this harness, just looking around, And I can remember to this day seeing the Twin Towers down in New York.
Yeah.
You could see the Manhattan skyline, and there was the Twin Towers from Danbury. You could see it. It was a beautiful, clear day. And, it's just one of those memories that'll always stick with me. And, it was spectacular.
Do you think if you hadn't, I guess, gone down the horticulture route, do you think maybe you would have gotten more into flying, maybe even into flying?
Yeah, it was just something, being single, and of course you go flying, you're gone for the day.
Yeah.
And a lot of times go to Ellenville, New York to fly, I'd throw a bunch of clothes in and whatever, and it was like not the 60s, but the 80s hippie, and you're just late 70s, and you'd sleep on the ground and sleep in the pickup truck, and whatever, get up and do it all over again, because you could, right? You didn't have any, I don't want to say responsibilities. I mean, it was working, but it was like, I could go for the weekend, disappear, go flying. And of course, I'd come back. Oh yeah, Mom, I was up 10,000 feet, and flew into a cloud and heard this airplane, couldn't see where it was.
Oh gosh.
And then, of course, she's like, you can see her having heart failure. But they just, they couldn't imagine what I was doing.
So was there anybody who you mentioned when you were, flying, that there were people who kind of ridiculed you, and who were like, why are you doing this? Did this ever happen with, your career path, or was it more, was that more readily accepted?
Yeah, when I got out of Henry Abbott Tech and I worked in plumbing, and there was a bunch of things that happened at the same time. You probably have no idea, but so this was in the late 70s, early 80s, and believe it or not, the interest rates for mortgage were like 21, 22%. I mean, it's unimaginable now. People complaining about a 4%, but
Yeah.
back then, that's what it was. Uh, so, 1 minute you were working, the next minute you weren't.
Mhm.
Right. So that was kind of discouraging. And the people you were working with were just, uh, and again, I don't want to say everybody,
Yeah.
but a lot of them were just crude, I guess would be the name word, and it was like, I've always had this term. People like to build themselves up simply by tearing other people down,
Mm.
and if you're making an effort
Mhm.
and trying to do something right and it makes them look bad, they
Yeah.
have to find a way to tear you down so they don't look bad.
Yeah.
And that just really bugged the living crap out of me.
Mhm.
It's just, how do you live like that? Where you just find something bad to say something about somebody else because they're working hard trying to do better, and that makes me look bad,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so I got really discouraged with the building trades like that, and that's, I think, what kind of pushed me into when I took the job working for the nursery full time. They were
Mhm.
nice.
Yeah.
They loved everything you did, always high praises. Kind of, at that age, you're into expending energy and doing the work. And then, he got me to go to college. And I'm forever grateful to them for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
You know, but and you trying to figure out, well, how does this career path happen? I mean, I never planned it,
Yeah.
but it was just, this is what happened, and it
Yeah.
nudged me this way. And I took a job with him full time, and then he took me to school. But it was just that atmosphere and the construction trades that were just, and of course, I was really young, so I didn't push back. And, I didn't come from a family. I wasn't taught to just tell somebody, go pound sand, and get out of my face. It was just, kind of kept quiet and did my thing. It was just like, this ain't for me, you
Mhm.
know. But I am so very glad that I learned what I learned.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
You
it's
know?
definitely important because I think a lot of people kind of hope that the path is very straightforward and that you
Yeah.
could kind of just, say, I want to do this, I'm going to do it. It's, no obstacles are ever going to be in my way. All of that kind of stuff. So I'm noticing kind
One
of a
of the
trend.
things, like,
Yeah.
remember when I was talking about my wife's friend who did all this volunteer work and everything?
Mhm.
And one of the things I learned, years down the road, and realized, and by then it was too late, was, when you're in school and like, okay, it would have been nice to get a job with the state and the DEEP, which was the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, and all that. Well,
Mhm.
how do you get those jobs? Well, the people do internships, right? And
Mhm.
then, a job position opens up and they know you because you work in there and you're doing the internship. And the way the world works a lot of times is, they know they have to advertise the job and they put it out there, but they already know who it is they're going to hire. They're going to hire that person doing the internship. They get kind of slated, and that's how you kind of slide into it. But again,
Yeah.
there's that putting your best foot forward. You're doing
Yeah.
that internship. You're working for free. But then, once you get the job, you have good benefits and insurance, and, maybe the pay is not the best, but, those benefits and insurance are really a big thing these days, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
again, it's kind of putting your best foot forward, and you don't know exactly what's going to pay off, but usually it does.
Mhm.
Good people put their best foot forward, and, something will come to you and it'll pay off. You
Yeah.
don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to be, but
Yeah.
from what I've seen over the years, that's what happens. Put your
Mhm.
best foot forward, and something will just, all of a sudden one day happen, and
Yeah.
it's a good deal.
I mean, that's definitely, it gives some sense of, I guess, reassurance because it does seem to be the trend with the people who I've spoken to. In addition to you, it seems like everyone sort of says the same thing. If you just try, you just give it all you've got. You keep a kind of an open mindset and a positive mindset. Things do sort of work out. But I'm wondering if there's anything that in the beginning of this career path, if there's anything that you wish you had known at the beginning.
Oh God.
Yeah. That maybe, like, people who are starting, maybe your career path or their own, that maybe you can impart onto them so that they have a
Wish
little bit of
that I
extra
had
wisdom.
known. Yeah. Um, oh gosh. You know, I'm not even sure where to start or how to
Yeah.
answer that. Wish that I had known. I mean, you just, obviously, I think there's a little bit of, you catch more flies with honey than, you know,
Mhm.
you think of yourself, you go somewheres and do something, and somebody is just super nice and helpful and everything, and the impression that leaves on you and
Mhm.
others,
Yeah.
you know, and I've gotten quite a bit of that back from the botanical garden.
Mhm.
People enjoy my classes. Well, look at what you're doing. You're doing this, and you asked me, you thought of me, and it wasn't because I was an sob, and I enjoy doing this sort of thing, and in the long run, it will help me. And I guess while I can talk about that sort of thing now, like I've got that figured out now,
Yeah.
I wish I had known that many years ago, coming out
Mhm.
of high school, that okay, I should have done an internship and maybe, gotten a job, did that free work and gotten slated in. Because over the years, worked for myself, worked for other companies, worrying about health insurance, raising a family, and everything. Where uh, I wish I had put a little bit more value on those benefits,
Hmm.
right? Okay, you're working for less, but boy, those benefits are worth something,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to medical insurance and all that. And, working for the state, or, maybe get involved with a union or something. My father in law, uh, they came from coal mining region in Pennsylvania, and they ended up out here in Connecticut. And he applied for, and at the time, this years ago, got the job as a paid fireman in the city of Danbury. And that was a union job, and he did very well with it over the years, because they worked like a 14-hour rotational shift.
Mhm.
So you'd work three 14-hour shifts, right? So over the course of 3 days, right? Well, now you've got, 4 days off, and he'd go and he'd do his little electrical work, uh, odd jobs and this and that, but all
Mhm.
the time, because he was a paid fireman, had that job nailed down.
Yeah.
He was getting good benefits, health insurance for his family and all that. But that was because of that specific job, that paid firemen, good benefits, and all that. And I wish I had put a higher, uh, uh, more weight to that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I worked hard over the years. I don't regret it,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was kind of a little different, uh, career path, mindset, whatever you want to call it. But it was really gratifying for him.
Mhm.
Help people. He
Yeah.
went into fires, and pulled people out. That stereotypic thing. And it wasn't always like that,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Yes. So
yeah.
I'm wondering, since you mentioned that you kind of wish you put more weight on that, when you were starting out, if you, I guess could have gone back in time and you had the option of doing what you did or potentially going into a line of work that offered you benefits, but that you weren't really that interested in, if that was your choice, would you have still, followed the same path you did?
Yeah, I think if I think I would have taken a little bit different career path in terms of while I was young, doing an internship, um, and possibly getting a job with the state or something like that. And it just would have been a little bit easier, I think. But I don't know, who's to say? I mean, I made some pretty good money, one of the big mistakes I made in life, if you will, was, I was so impressed with that little family nursery, right?
Hmm.
He got me to go to school. He was in Reading, and, there was a lot of money there. And he did very well for himself and all this stuff. And I always envisioned doing something like he was doing elsewhere. And I thought, okay, well, married, buy a house. I'm talented. I can fix things up. And we bought this little house. It was really a summer cottage on the lake here in Southbury, and paid top dollar for it. And the housing market was cranking. And it wasn't but 2 weeks after we bought it, the housing market tanked,
Mm.
right? This was in the 80s. And, I kept working on it, put money, fixed it up. A lot of the people in the neighborhood, it's beautiful. It's great what you're doing and this and that. And then, trying to sell it. And we were on the market for like 4 years. Eventually the value of the house came up to where I think I got all the money back for all the materials I put into it, but essentially didn't make anything on the labor. So it was kind of a wash. And, had, two little boys at the time. And, so a lot of hard work that went into it,
Mhm.
and really didn't get much anything for it. And, eventually sold it. Now, we bought this house 25, 30 years ago. And, uh, you know, it all worked out in the end. But, it was a
Yeah.
lot of hard work, a lot
Yeah.
of hard work,
Yeah.
you
So
know. But I was just so gung ho
mhm.
on, I had this vision of what I wanted to do,
Mhm.
and just couldn't attain it. And largely because, I was so gung ho to do it, just had to buy a house, just had to do it, not really knowing about markets and that, this bubble was going to pop and the market was going to down. They closed banks, the feds took over the banks. That's how bad it was in the 80s, you know,
Yeah.
and, we paid for that.
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely goes to show, I guess, how, you could have these interests and you can be gung ho about something, but it could pay a little bit to maybe not to not go forward with them, right? But
It's
to
kind of
maybe
like the
educate
love
yourself
is
more.
blind thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's really what it was.
Mhm.
I had such a passion for everything I wanted to do, and I was going to do it. And you're full of spit and vinegar, and bought something I shouldn't have bought.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I did some crazy things there one time. So I was putting in a little coal stove in this little house, right? It was just a little summer cottage thing. It wasn't even a year-round house, right? But all these little cottages over the years, they built up and people add to them and insulate, kind of, you know. So I tiled this one little corner. I'm going to put a little stove in. It was coal, burned coal in it. It was good, right? And I had to put a chimney up through the roof. and it was late in the fall, so it was cold, and I had the stainless steel flue pipe going up through the ceiling and through the roof, and so I had to tar it up there, flashing around and seal it. Well, the bucket of tar that I had was cold,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was real congealed. So I wanted to warm it up so that it was pliable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I take it and I put it in the kitchen sink. This gallon, it's like a paint can, which it went right over the hole, the drain in the sink, right? And I turn the hot water on. And I think what happened was my wife called me to look at something. So I said, okay, yeah, this will take a minute to fill. And I went and looked at whatever she had for me, got done, and I proceeded to go right back up into the attic to keep working on what I was working, right? So about 15 minutes go by, and all of a sudden I hear this, Mark! As soon as I heard that, I was like,
Oh God.
the freaking water, right? And it's pouring over the kitchen sink and
Oh
onto
my
the
gosh.
floor. And thank God it was an old house because it just went through the floorboards.
Oh.
Got the insulation wet underneath. So then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, now you're spending the rest of the afternoon instead of getting, I was going to have the stove going, right? Now I'm, crawling underneath the house in the mud because it was
Everything,
a dirt crawl space, the water dripping down, the insulation falling down, getting all that out. So I wouldn't, so it was just like, here's another one of these, great stories. Like, oh my God. It was just, yeah.
Yeah. So
things like that, you live and learn.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I do wonder, since you mentioned kind of maybe the downsides of going into things that you're interested in, and like being so, gung ho about it, maybe not thinking about it too much. So I'm
yeah.
wondering what your thoughts are on, should everybody try to pursue their interests if they prepare themselves and like are educated about it, or do you
Well,
think
I
there's
think
that shouldn't?
sometimes you need to take a little bit of a deep breath,
Mhm.
step back. If you get somebody that's not so fully invested in what you're doing and has a little bit different opinion,
Mhm.
it may be hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to kind of digest that opinion a little bit.
Mhm.
Maybe I am being a little bit overzealous, or, not looking at everything with a clear mind. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard because you want to do what you want to do,
Mhm.
and you have full confidence and faith in yourself that you can do it. And, you just don't realize how big a mountain you're trying to move.
Mhm. No, that's definitely it's good advice, because I think that a lot of people, probably do deal with that. I tend to be kind of on the other side, and, if I hear like even in my own head, I have these voices that are like, "Oh, you shouldn't do this thing," so I kind of tend to err on the other side. So hearing people who tell me like, "Oh no, this is a good idea," that's kind of what helps me. Because if I hear like one person who's like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" My brain starts working, and it's like, maybe I shouldn't
Well,
do
my wife calls it selective hearing,
it.
right?
Yeah.
People hear what they want to hear,
Mhm.
and I'm probably no different. You hear what you want to hear, and
Mhm.
you tend to block things out that you don't want to hear,
Yeah.
and that thing that you don't want to hear may be the right thing, but
Mhm.
who knows, I mean, I'd be a very rich man if I could sell crystal balls that
Mm.
work, so that you could see what was going to happen, or to know something is right and wrong, or going to
Mhm.
be better than the other, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I do have one last question. It's kind of twofold. So I'm wondering, of course, it's called Lost and Found podcast. So I'm wondering, was there ever a time where you did feel lost? I know that you said when you were younger, you kind of were just like, you didn't really feel like you knew what you wanted to do. So did you feel like a sense of, maybe pain in that?
the I'm not sure that this answers directly what you want to say, but
Mhm.
one of the things I really felt lost in was, when I was flying and really doing well, I was having a good time. If you can imagine, I mean, can you imagine flying in a hang glider across the Hudson River, looking down at the Newburgh Beacon Bridge,
Mm.
flying over the mountains out there, you know, flying into clouds,
Yeah.
at 10, 12,000 feet above sea level, going into these huge cumulonimbus clouds, right? I
Wow.
mean, you felt like you were on top of the world because you knew so few other people were doing that.
Yeah.
And that was, about the when I was right at my peak of flying, that I ended up being encouraged to go to college. And somewheres in there, I got to know my wife and dating, and then I was in college, and of course, in college, it was getting tougher to go flying, but I would get out and go fly. And then when I got engaged, it was kind of like, there was still that little bit of a stigma that it was a real dangerous sport,
Mhm.
you know. And while I had friends that, they just couldn't, whatever, keep on flying, buy a house, raise a family.
Yeah.
Okay. And the one individual I'm thinking, okay, he did fine with it. But I was just like, and this is probably a little bit too risky. I think I thought of it as not being fair to my wife,
Yeah.
to be taking that kind of risk,
Mhm.
and getting married is like, and I do know one individual, really nice guy, that he went up to New Hampshire. I think he borrowed somebody else's glider. It was kind of a next level up glider, more high performance, it's a little bit harder to fly. And he did have an accident and drove into the ground, broke
Oh my
his neck,
gosh.
paralyzed from the
Ugh.
neck down.
Wow.
His wife was just an absolute saint. Didn't blame anybody, hold anybody, not bitter. According to her, it was just a terrible freak accident.
Mhm.
But that was real hard to accept. It was, somebody that I knew.
Yeah.
And, he bought the farm, and he ended up, he's in a hospital bed, totally paralyzed from the neck down. And he planned his own funeral,
Ugh.
planned all the music, picked out
Wow.
all the recitals for people to read, and instructed the doctors to pull the plug.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And that was real hard to accept,
Yeah.
because when I was working at Lesco, he came in, and I had known him from years before. He came in, happened to know each other. He was like, "We got to go flying again, get back out there." Of course, and now I'm married, and I'm like, really not. I was like, yeah. And he went, and it was just a real tragic set of circumstances. But like I said, I had other friends that did it, got away
Mhm.
with it,
Yeah.
But maybe if I'm one of these, if I had kept doing it, my luck would have been I'd have broke my neck too.
Mm.
Something would have happened. So I don't know. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. My
Mhm.
father-in-law's
Yeah.
famous words. But you can't let that stop you. You got to
Mhm.
do what you believe in. And if things go well, I could walk out the front door and
Yeah. Yeah.
get run over by a car.
Mhm.
Any of
Yeah.
us could. You don't
Yeah.
know. So I don't want to discourage anybody, but you do what makes you feel good, I guess.
Yeah, that was actually kind of the other half of the question, to people who might be feeling that sense of, kind of confusion about what they should be doing. If you had any advice to those people who kind of just need to hear something, I guess, positive to like help them, maybe,
Well,
find
look at
themselves.
history. How
Yeah.
how many times, how many people, follow their heart, their gut, and I think most of us believe there's something to that.
Mhm.
And if you really, really believe in something, there's a good possibility that you'll make it work, make it happen. Uh, you'll be right. Yeah, there's always a small chance that you'll be wrong, but you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move on. You look at history, how many people, you know, get shot down, face adversity, and you see these little quotes and stuff. It's not how you fall down, it's how you get back up,
Mhm.
right? And easier said than done, probably
Yeah.
sometimes, right?
Mhm.
But when you're successful, uh, you think of the good part.
Mhm.
The bad part's easily forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once things
Sure.
go well.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
um,
That actually that was supposed to be the last question, but it kind of makes me think of something else too. Um, do you feel like, what you're doing now, so horticulture and teaching, do you feel like that's what you were meant to do?
oh, that's an interesting question because I
Mhm.
I can say over the years, even back in the '80s, I can remember uh, Chipper Anderson, his wife was a teacher, and I can remember her saying, "You should consider teaching." So there have been a number of people over the years that have said, like that truck driver, you should be a teacher.
Mhm.
Mrs. Anderson, you should think about teaching. There's a number of people. And I guess they just saw something in my personality, maybe that uh, thought it was a good quality for teaching. I don't know.
Mhm.
Um, there's just so many different paths you can go down.
Yeah.
But I'm eternally grateful for all the things that I've done. And I feel like I can now move them into the teaching thing, like at the botanical garden. And it's what I know. And I feel it's very difficult to express how good I feel when I get done teaching a class. And some of the reviews that I've gotten, uh, it's hard to sit here and say this, but I mean, they just about made me cry.
Aw.
You know,
Mhm.
a few people have, written cards and put nice notes in them.
Mhm.
And I never imagined that I would have, that kind of impact on people.
Yeah.
And and I guess maybe in closing, that's something I could say, for your listeners, in that um, I think most of us don't realize what kind of potential impact we can have on others.
Mhm.
You know, and you may personally not think it's very much,
Yeah.
but almost guaranteed there's somebody else out there that will just think the absolute world of what you did for them or
Mhm.
what you could do for them or whatever. I think we shortchange ourselves a lot
Mm.
on the impact that we can have on others. And certainly, Jim, that family nursery, Jim and Sheila. I mean, the impact he had on my life is immeasurable.
Yeah.
But he was really just that kind of person. He
Mhm.
just, everybody he got involved with or touched, just everybody just spoke so highly of him because he gave so much of himself.
Mhm.
Gave so much of himself. Just think of what how much they cared about me and they
Mhm.
were thinking about me to spend a day, pay me for the working for the day, and drive me up to Yukon and show me this is where you need to go to school.
Mhm. Yeah.
The impact that, that was that, good, bad, or indifferent, mostly good, it probably changed my life,
Yeah.
for whatever direction I would have gone in.
Mhm.
But so I think, for a lot of people, you can't underestimate the good that you can do for others.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
we all need help in a way, I guess. We all need each other in some
and
way.
and when you do that good for other people,
Mhm.
it just the 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 internal wellness, uh, gratification that you get out of doing something good for others
Mhm.
is, for the most part, probably immeasurable,
Yeah.
right? I mean, how do you measure that? Just,
Mm.
like I said, I teach these classes. Yes, I'm getting paid a little bit, which is nice. I mean, it's not, uh, everything, but at the end, to get those comments
Mhm.
that are just off the charts, some of them
Yeah.
just they're very moving.
Yeah.
And you can tell they're heartfelt, and it's just I don't know how to describe it,
Mhm.
but it's I'm 64. I've got pretty good health, and I'm so very grateful that I can do this teaching
Mhm.
and people enjoy it, and I'm doing something for other people. It's
Yeah.
just it's immeasurable. It really is.
So is it safe to say that, you would choose this and like a path that ends up helping people over maybe something where you're making tons and tons of money? Or
Yeah, I think oh, yeah, well, let me say this. My dad, God rest his soul.
Mhm.
Okay, we didn't always get along. He was tough, but he used to say, and you can credit this to George Michael Kokinchak. Money can't buy everything, but it sure helps. No, he said, money can't buy happiness, right?
Mhm.
Money can't buy happiness, right? How many times
Yeah.
have you heard that? Money
Yeah.
can't buy happiness, but he added something to it, but it sure helps, right? And that's what he used to say. Money can't buy happiness, but it sure helps,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
And, that's, yeah, we can all do work, like I said, it's very gratifying, and you get what you get, but in the end, you got to pay the bills, I guess,
Mhm.
but I guess it's just, it's what you want out of life, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. I guess if you
And
could find Go ahead.
I'm still learning what I want out of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the goal then is to find something that, you could make some money in, but also that you're interested in, and
Yeah.
that kind of melds it all together.
And that's a tough goal,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure we all know what that, how to do it, or, but you keep plugging, and
Mhm.
most of the time, I think it just comes along, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So,
I think that
all right,
about wraps it up for
cool.
this. Awesome. Thank you so much.
And all right, you take care. Good to hear from you. And
Bye.
thank you for contacting me. I enjoyed it very much. Good luck.
Awesome. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Bye.
All
Good
right.
night.
Bye bye.